They didn't hold hands. That's what nobody talks about. After everything, the report, the silence, the 3 years of careful distance, what the cameras caught was this: William walking half a step ahead, Catherine's jaw set like she'd already rehearsed not reacting, and Charles standing slightly apart from both of them, the way a man stands when he's decided that proximity is not the same thing as closeness. The headline said solidarity. I watched it on a screen in a borrowed office in Westminster, eating a sandwich I couldn't taste, and, I thought, that is not what solidarity looks like. Solidarity is messy. It bleeds at the edges. It argues in hallways and, then, shows up anyway. What I saw was a family doing the thing families do when the alternative is worse than the performance. They arranged themselves into a shape that looked like unity and, they held it, rigidly, for however long the cameras needed. I've spent 11 years studying institutions under pressure. Parliaments. Corporations. Armies. I know what fracture looks like when it's been plastered over. This is that story. Not the headline. The plaster. My name is Dr. Priya Anand, and I have been a constitutional historian for long enough to know that institutions do not die from scandals. They die from the management of them. I keep a personal log. Have done since my doctorate. Not notes. Notes are professional, indexable, useful. A log is something else. It's where I write the things I can't footnote: the smell of a room, the angle of a man's shoulders, the particular silence that follows a question nobody wanted to be asked aloud. I started a new entry the morning the Andrew report dropped. The palace is going to do something performative today, I wrote. Watch for it. I was right. I just didn't expect to be standing inside it when they did. Let me tell you what the report actually said, and what it didn't. It didn't name anything new. That was the cruelest part of it, not revelation but excavation, the same bones arranged more precisely, more damning in their specificity. Andrew's proximity to Epstein. The financial settlements. The interview, God, always back to the interview, that catastrophic, bewildering hour of television that seemed to have been produced by a man who genuinely believed charm could reroute facts. What the report did do was provide a timeline. Charles was on that timeline. William was on that timeline. Not as participants. As people who knew, and navigated, and made choices about how close to stand. That is the sentence the palace would spend the next 72 hours trying to bury. I was in London because I'd been asked to consult on something unrelated, a parliamentary working group on succession law, routine stuff, the kind of engagement that pads CVs and occasionally generates a footnote in policy documents no one reads. My contact at the cabinet office had texted me that morning, heads up. It's going to be a strange day at the palace. You might want to stay near a screen. I stayed near a screen. By noon, the photographs were everywhere. William. Catherine. Charles. Standing outside the chapel at Windsor, no occasion listed, no ceremony scheduled, just the three of them and a photographer who'd been tipped that they'd be there. The framing was deliberate. I could see the deliberateness of it like you can see brushstrokes when you stand too close to a painting. They were arranged in a triangle, Charles fractionally forward, William and Catherine flanking, everyone facing the camera with expressions that said we are steady without a single one of them looking at each other. I stared at that photograph for 4 minutes. Then, I wrote in my log, Catherine's right hand is closed. A fist. Not a dramatic one, she wasn't bracing. But, her fingers were curled against her palm in that particular way women curl their fingers when they are managing something and have decided managing it is the only available option. I've seen it in depositions. In corridors outside hospital rooms. In the faces of women who are very good at holding shapes. I know that shape. I had a source at the palace, I won't say who, won't even gesture toward the department, who called me at 2:30 that afternoon. I was eating the tasteless sandwich. She talked fast, the way people talk when they've decided to say the thing and outrun the second guessing of it. It was a room decision, she said. The three of them in a room, and Charles said, look, I'm paraphrasing, Charles said that the worst thing they could do was look divided. And, were they? I asked. Divided? The pause she gave me was a full answer. William, she said, had not spoken to his father in 6 days. I put the sandwich down. 6 days, I repeated, because sometimes you need to hear yourself say the number to believe the weight of it. Since the preliminary report language leaked. There's no kind way to say this. He was livid. Not about Andrew. About the choice to not act sooner, more decisively. About what it looks like to his children when the family protects its own regardless of what the own has done. I thought about that. About a man who will one day be king, standing in a room where his father told him that the shape of the family mattered more than the rot inside it, and deciding, for reasons of duty or resignation or pure pragmatic survival, to stand in the triangle anyway. That's not solidarity. That's a different word. I'm still finding it. What I want to tell you about William is not the public version. Not the air, composed, groomed, photogenic in his grief at his grandmother's funeral and his restraint at his brother's departure and his patience through years of his family doing spectacular things in full public view. That version exists and is not false, exactly, but it is curated in a way that strips out the texture. The texture is this: he is a man who grew up understanding that love in his family was administered formally. That warmth had protocol. That the people he needed most were also the people most required to perform needing nothing. He lost his mother at 15 in a tunnel in Paris while the world watched, and his family asked him to grieve on a schedule that served the institution. He has never, as far as I can tell, fully forgiven any of them for that. He keeps going anyway. That's not resilience in the clean motivational poster sense. That is something thornier, something that looks like loyalty from outside and feels like something else entirely from inside. A man who shows up because the alternative is to let the thing he loves become only the worst version of itself. I've met people like that. I've been one, briefly, during a bad year I don't write about in professional contexts. You keep going. Not because it doesn't cost you. Because the cost of stopping is something you can't afford to calculate. Catherine, my source told me, had been the one to speak first when the room went quiet. Not to defend the plan. Not to argue for or against. She'd said, if we do this, we do it properly. Or we don't do it at all. And then, she'd turned to William, and whatever passed between them in that look was not captured in the photograph and will not be reconstructed in my log or anyone else's. Some things happen in the space between two people and stay there. They did it properly. Closed fist. Triangle formation. Eyes front. I watched a 23-second clip of them walking from the chapel toward the waiting cars afterward, and, I counted, William glanced at Catherine twice. She glanced back once. Charles looked at neither of them, his gaze fixed on something in the middle distance, the expression of a man performing the thing he's always performed, so fluently now that perhaps he no longer distinguishes the performance from the interior. 23 seconds. I wrote in my log, this is what it looks like when people love something broken and choose it anyway. Not happily. Not without cost. Just again. And again. Because that is the only verb they have left. Then, I closed the laptop. Outside, London continued its grey Tuesday, indifferent and ongoing, the way cities always are when something seismic is happening in a room they can't see. The room it happened in had crown molding. I keep thinking about that for reasons I haven't fully worked out. There's a phenomenon I encountered once in a paper on post-conflict governance. The author called it institutional muscle memory. The idea that organizations under repeated stress don't just develop policies, they develop reflexes. Automatic responses so deeply encoded that they activate before the conscious decision-making process catches up. The British monarchy has muscle memory that goes back centuries. Close ranks. Appear. Say nothing specific. Outlast. The individuals inside it are, in my professional observation, both the beneficiaries and the casualties of that reflex. I met Charles 3 years ago at a heritage conservation event, briefly, the kind of encounter where you shake a hand and someone takes a photograph and 2 weeks later you find the photograph on your institution's website with a caption that makes it sound like a relationship that doesn't exist. He was, in the way of people who have been performing for 50 years, absolutely present and, somehow not entirely there, his attention a perfect simulation of focus, his warmth technically accurate in every external measure. I remember thinking, this is a man who has perfected the art of being in a room. I also remember thinking, I wonder what it cost him. The afternoon after the photographs, I had a working session at a Whitehall building I'll keep unnamed routine, unrelated to any of this, and I sat across a conference table from a man I'll call Martin, who'd spent 12 years as a mid-level palace official before a quiet departure that everyone understood was not entirely voluntary. Martin has a habit of clicking his pen. Not nervously. Rhythmically. Like a metronome he's installed in himself to measure the passage of moments he'd rather not dwell in. He'd seen the photographs. It'll hold for 48 hours, he said. Maybe 72 if the next news cycle cooperates. And then? Click. Click. And then, something else happens. It always does. The monarchy survives because the news cycle is mercifully short. People are furious for a week and, then, they're furious about something else. He paused. Charles knows this. He's always known this. His entire strategy since accession has essentially been, weather it. Is that cynical? I asked. Or practical? He looked at me the way people look when the question they've been asked is the one they've been sitting with for years and still haven't fully answered. Both, he said. It's both, and the tragedy of it is that you can't always tell from the inside which one you're doing. Here is what I've come to believe about Charles, and I want to be careful with this because it's observation layered over inference layered over the unavoidable filters of my own assumptions. He loves his family and the vocabulary he was given. That vocabulary is limited. It was handed to him in institutions and protocols and the particular grammar of duty, and it does not have a good word for I am sorry I failed you, or I chose wrong and I know it, or even simply I see you without an event or a schedule attached. He shows up. That is what his vocabulary has for love. You show up, you perform the shape of it, you endure. The report landed on a Thursday. By Sunday he had gathered his son and his daughter-in-law and stood in a triangle in front of a chapel and broadcast, to anyone who knew how to read it, we are still here. I find that moving and inadequate in equal measure, the way most human things are when they're doing their best with a broken toolkit. What nobody reported on, because nobody knew, was what happened after the photographs. My source told me this the following day, her voice quieter this time, the telling slower. William had walked ahead to the car. Catherine had paused just a moment, just long enough, and turned back toward Charles. And Charles, who has spent his entire adult life understanding that everything he does is potentially a photograph, had reached out and briefly touched her arm. Not a gesture for cameras. The cameras were already done. Just a touch. Arm quick. The way you reach for someone when the words you have aren't enough and you have to let the hand do the work. Catherine had looked at him for a second. Then, she'd nodded once, gotten in the car, and they'd driven away. My source had been standing 40 feet away. She said she'd had to look somewhere else immediately and, then, later couldn't tell anyone why. I went for a walk that evening along the embankment, because sometimes thinking requires movement and I'd been sitting in borrowed chairs all day. The Thames was doing what the Thames does, brown and indifferent and permanent, and I had my hands in my pockets and my recorder going, narrating notes to myself that I'd transcribe later, and I kept coming back to the question that had been snagging at me since noon. What does it cost? Not politically. Politically I can model it, forecast it, track the polling. What does it cost in the body? To be William, who had not spoken to his father for 6 days and, then, stood beside him anyway for a photograph because the institution required it. To carry the particular fury of a person who knows the difference between what should have happened and what did, and who has made the calculation again and again that his role requires him to subordinate that knowledge to the shape. What does that do to a person over years? I think about the men I've studied who occupied roles like his sons of difficult fathers who were also sons of difficult fathers, the inheritance of dysfunction moving forward through bloodlines and protocols, everyone performing the corrected version of what was modeled for them and never quite believing they've gotten it right. I think about Catherine's closed fist. I think about a hand on an arm, 40 feet from the cameras. I think about the fact that William glanced at her twice in 23 seconds and she glanced back once, and whatever that exchange contained, it contained enough. Enough to keep standing. Enough to keep going. That's not a small thing. We underestimate the quiet heroism of people who keep choosing each other inside broken systems. Who don't leave, not because they're weak, but because they've decided the thing is worth the cost of not leaving. Who show up, closed-fisted and jaw-set, and make the photograph anyway. It's not the heroism of movies. It doesn't look like anything from outside. From inside, I imagine, it feels like the hardest thing there is. I wrote in my log that night, back in my hotel room, the Thames invisible outside but present somehow, the institution will survive this. It has survived worse. But the people inside it absorb everything the institution sheds, every scandal managed, every fracture plastered, every decision to endure over change. They hold it in their posture. In closed fists. In the way they don't quite look at each other. The question I can't answer yet: what happens when a body can't hold anymore? Then, I went to sleep. In the morning, a new story had already started. 6 weeks after the photographs, I got a call from a journalist I half-trusted, the kind of half-trust that means she's accurate but selective, which in my experience is the best you can hope for from anyone who works in proximity to power. She was writing a piece. Not about the report. About the aftermath of the report, specifically, about the internal dynamics of the royal family in the weeks following. She wanted a quote about institutional resilience. I told her I'd think about it. Then, I didn't call her back. The thing about institutional resilience is that it is a phrase that sounds like admiration but functions as an alibi. Institutions are resilient. They endure. They absorb damage and reform and continue. We write this as though it is a virtue. But resilience requires something to be resilient against. And the things institutions are most resilient against are often the things that should, by rights, change them. I couldn't give her a clean quote. I couldn't make it tidy. What I could tell you, what I kept returning to, in the log, on the walks, in the middle of unrelated meetings when my attention slipped its leash, was Catherine. Not the Princess of Wales. Catherine. I want to be precise about that distinction because it matters to everything I'm about to say. The Princess of Wales is a role. It has existed before her and will exist after. It has requirements and a costume and a particular quality of attention it must sustain in public, and the woman who currently occupies it has occupied it with, in my professional assessment, a discipline that borders on the superhuman. Catherine is the person doing that. And, in the weeks after the report, the photographs, the triangle, something shifted in how she appeared. Not dramatically. Nothing that would register on a headline. But, I study people in institutions the way ornithologists study birds. Small behaviors, repeated, carry more information than any single dramatic event. She started speaking first in joint appearances. Small thing. She'd always been graceful, warm, positioned slightly to the side of the main narrative. In the appearances after the report, she was not forward, exactly. Present differently. Like a woman who had stood in a triangle and held the shape and decided, quietly, that she would not simply hold shapes anymore. I don't know what changed internally. I'm not inside her. I know what I saw. My source called me one last time, in the third week. She sounded tired. Not the tired of overwork, the tired of sustained alertness, the exhaustion of a person who has been paying close attention to something painful for too long. William is talking to his father again, she said. That's good. I don't know what it is. A pause. They had a meeting. 40 minutes. I don't know what was said. Afterward, William went to see his children. It was a school thing, nothing official, and he was photographed and he looked. She stopped. He looked like himself, she said finally. For the first time in a month, he looked like himself. I sat with that. Then, what does that mean to you? It means something got said. Or something got, I don't know. Acknowledged. Her voice was careful now, precise. Not fixed. You don't fix 40 years in 40 minutes. But, acknowledged. I thought about the hand on the arm. 40 feet from the cameras. Here is what I believe, and I want to be clear that this is belief, not scholarship. Charles is a man who learned love as performance because performance was the only language his own parents had. He passed that language forward, imperfectly, to a son who grew up knowing the language was inadequate but had no other lexicon to replace it with. That son lost his mother in a way that scrambled everything, scrambled the already inadequate language, added layers of grief and rage and public endurance that compacted into something that doesn't have a clean name. And then, that son became a husband, and a father, and the future king, and all of that history lives in his body every day while he performs the shape of steadiness for a watching world. The miracle, if that's the right word, and I'm not sure it is not that they appeared in that photograph. The miracle is the 40 minutes. Whatever was said. Whatever was acknowledged. One man trying, finally, to hand the right word to another man across a distance of mislearned vocabularies and accumulated wounds. I've spent my career studying how institutions survive. I've written 3 books about it. I can tell you the mechanisms, the strategies, the structural factors. I can't tell you why people keep trying to reach each other inside them. But they do. Again and again, people do. My last night in London, I went to a pub near my hotel, not for atmosphere, just because I wanted noise that wasn't my own thoughts. I sat at the bar and ate something fried and watched football on a screen in the corner and listened to 2 men argue companionably about something I didn't follow. The barman, 30s, efficient, the particular exhaustion of someone on a double shift, glanced at the news ticker running underneath the football. Another palace item. I could see the headline from where I was sitting. He looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then, he refilled someone's pint and moved on. That's what it means to the world, I thought. 3 seconds and a pint. The people in those photographs carry what they carry, the weight of the unspoken, the cost of the closed fist, the 40 minutes of whatever passed between a father and a son, and, to the rest of the world, it is a ticker underneath a football match. I don't say that to diminish it. I say it because there's something clarifying about the scale. The institution is vast and ancient, and the camera never stops. And, inside it, people are still just people, still trying to say the right thing too late, still reaching out hands when words have failed, still showing up for photographs when they'd rather be anywhere else on earth, still trying to learn a better language than the one they were given. Still trying. I finished my pint. Wrote 3 lines in my log. Left a tip that was slightly more than the occasion required, which is a habit I can't explain and won't try to. Outside, London was doing its late-night thing, buses and rain smell and people moving with the specific purposefulness of people who have somewhere to be and are going there regardless. I walked back to my hotel with my hands in my pockets. In my log, those 3 lines, the institution will outlast all of them. This is its function and its cruelty. The people inside it are doing the old human thing, holding what they were given and trying to hand something better forward. Whether they manage it *, the entry ends there. I didn't finish the sentence. I'm still not sure I know how.